Bueno, gente, before we go into this, we have to realize that here in America, power and wealth rule. The sistema really doesn't work for Chicanos or Mexicanos equally for the benefit of us all. In fact, when the little people speak up, the sistema usually crushes them or us. If that sounds a little cynical and bitter, pues you'll have to forgive me, but it's true. The story of Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Union and its struggle makes that painfully clear. Armed only with his unshakable commitment to a safe and just food supply, he struggled for over 30 years on behalf of the poorest workers in the United States. Low wages, inhumane working conditions, exposure to toxic pesticides, and long hours of back-breaking labor by children are among the evils he fought against. Today, the United Farm Workers continues the battle for change, fighting unfair labor practices, sexual harassment of women workers, pesticide contamination and pollution of our environment, and countless other abuses. We welcome you to this program as we pay our respetos to Cesar Chavez and Si Se Puede. Fields whose dust is forever stained with the blood of our sisters and brothers, far from the police and courts controlled by those who seek to destroy our union. We seek justice. The boycott is the one non-violent response left us, and therein lies our hope.
Así lo quiso el destino, la tierra de Cesar Chávez, líder de los campesinos. En las ciudades y campos, la esperanza nunca muere, ya lo dijo Cesar Chávez, compañeros, si se puede.
We want those pesticides banned. We want something done about that terrible problem with birth defects and the problem of cancer and also the poisoning to the workers. And we think that the best way to do it, we don't think it's going to be done through the legislative route because it hasn't been done. It's not going to be done through getting the bureaucrats to bring any regulatory measures because it hasn't been done. In fact, the government is the biggest liar in this drama. They lie to you more than anybody else. In fact, we have more problem with the damn government trying to get them to give us information than anybody else. They fight the gross battle. I mean, they're well trained. In Tulare County, we cannot go in and get information that should be made available to the public. We're threatened to go to court because we want to go into the desk and we want to know what the hell is being spelled with grape, and the bureaucrats won't let us. Give us all kinds of stuff.
Dicen los trabajadores, hay que unirse para luchar, con Cesar Chávez de líder, nuestras vidas cambiarán.
The dream to bring justice and self-determination to the fields of Aztlán is the hope of the struggle of the United Farm Workers Union. A struggle filled with bloodshed and hatred, with tears and victories, led by the strength of the people themselves. Cesar Chavez has endured, devoting his life to the betterment of the campesino.
Cesar Chávez, compañeros, si se puede.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. But in order for you to understand what we're faced with, and in order to be able to understand it's appropriate, first of all, to give you a brief background of the National Farm Workers Association, with emphasis on its origin and on some of the ideas and on its mainly the way it was organized. On March 31st of 1962, I quit my job with the Community Service Organization in Los Angeles and came to Delano with the idea of organizing farm workers, with the idea of forming a workers group that would not rely on outside financial assistance for at least for the initial part of the organization. A group that if it were to be organized would have to, at least the financial part of that organizing would have to come from the workers themselves. And so after a few weeks of rest and planning, we began the work of getting farm workers together, talking to them about the advantages of organization and also the responsibilities. In my 12 or so years working under Alinsky and Fred Ross, I had learned one thing, and that is that anywhere you go, you will find a small group of people, whether it be students or university professors or farm workers, who are already interested enough to do something about the problem that confronts them. So on this basis I went, and in order to build the beginning or the foundations of the association, I visited something like 85 small communities, including labor camps, and was thus able to form the nucleus of the Farm Workers Association. When I look back on the beginning of that work, it seems like we've gone a long ways. And of course, when I look forward, it seems like we haven't moved hardly anything or anywhere. But the idea was that the workers themselves had to pay for the organizing, that there had to be a due structure, that if they really felt and believed that this was a way out of their conditions facing them, that then they had to put up the money. And if they didn't put up the money, then what we were doing wasn't that important to them. And I felt then if it came to that, I had no right going around and talking to people, because I would be fooling myself, because then if they weren't convinced enough to the point that they wanted to pay $350 a month, that then there was no use in trying to organize them, and that perhaps my whole approach was not the right way of doing it. We started with 10 dues-paying members, and some of my friends in CSO and other friends would drive occasionally through Delano and would stop, take time enough to come and see what I was doing, would give me as much encouragement as they could, but at the same time, just before leaving, almost always they would say, you know, you've got a tough job, as if I didn't know. It surprised many people when they would ask me, how are you going to organize the workers when they're scattered? If we consider the San Joaquin Valley, which covers 8 counties, on the extreme south you have Arvin, California, and that's the home of the Georgia Fruit Corporation, and you go all the way to Stockton. This is several hundred miles, an awful lot of territory to cover, an awful lot of people to see. And so when they brought this up, I would say, if I can't organize from behind this desk, then I have no reason organizing. And then they would say, well, what do you mean by this? And I would say, I can only do a little bit, but I can do a lot if I never lose sight that what I'm doing has to be duplicated if it's going to get any place. And so those 10 members that began started duplicating things. And pretty soon there were 20, and then there were 30, and then there were 60, and then there were a lot more. It seems quite easy to say that they came and that they were duplicated very easily, and this is not the case. An awful lot of time, an awful lot of personal attention has to be given to each individual if he is going to then act as an organizer. So the whole approach was that we were getting members and also getting organizers.
3, 2, 1. This is Miguel Gavilan Molina reporting for Pacifica Radio and Flashpoints en Laonda bajita. I'm here in Delano, California at the 40 Acres Ranch at the 50th anniversary of the Delano grape strike that gave rise to the United Farm Workers. I am here with one of the founding members of the UFW and one of the principals in bringing the farm workers' struggle across the nation and to the world, and that is Dolores Huerta. Dolores, it's so good to see you here. Welcome to Pacifica.
Well, it's really wonderful to be here to this beautiful celebration that the United Farm Workers is hosting to celebrate the Delano grape strike. We know that the Delano grape strike, not only did it have a great impact on the farm workers, because farm workers learned the power of their numbers, the power of their strength, the power of their person to make changes in the industry. But the other thing it did, it inspired people in the cities. You know, the young students, Chicanos, when they came here, they were on the picket lines and they saw the courage of the farm workers. That inspired them then, of course, to do the walkouts in East Los Angeles. And it inspired, I think, many of our Chicanos in East LA and throughout the country to take power into their own hands and to start running for office, you know, and to start taking those positions that they needed to take.
Well, one of the things that the United Farm Workers did, the UFW, is it also galvanized the Chicano students, universities, Mecha, and it also mobilized the Brown Berets to provide security, to provide, assistance y todo eso. So, in a sense, the Chicano movement was able to rise because of the UFW.
Exactly. We might say that it was the padrino or the madrina of the Chicano movement.
And basically the spark that ignited the consciousness. One thing, Dolores, here we are, 50 years later, and that is one of the things that farm workers did is bring a consciousness to the food supply in this country, not only for protection for farm workers, working in the fields, but it brought a conciencia about the chemicals in our food. And because of the efforts to eradicate pesticides, herbicides, and the spraying of, those kinds of chemicals on workers, because there was a time where the airplanes would just fly by and spray you.
And unfortunately, that still happens. Although we were able in the Farm Workers Union to get many pesticides banned, like DDT, parathion, dinoseb, some of these fungicides, they still make new ones. And they're still using them. And farm workers are still getting poisoned today, unfortunately. And I think this is going to happen until we take all of the application of these economic poisons, take it out of the EPA, take it out of ag, and put it into health and human services. These are health issues, and this is where this belongs. It does not belong under the EPA. It belongs under health and human services, because farm workers' health, and not only farm workers, but the people who ingest this food that has been poisoned, that affects our health also. We have the highest cancer rate in the United States of anywhere in the world, and it's coming from the food that we eat. The other thing, too, I just want to let everybody know, right now we are trying to stop a bill in the U.S. Senate that has already passed the House of Representatives that will prevent any community, any state, to insist on labeling genetically modified foods. They want to prevent the labeling. And when we go into the store and we see an avocado or you see a banana or an apple, it's got a little sticker on it, right? The company that produced it. Well, hey, we want that sticker to let people know that this food has been genetically modified and we don't know what it's going to do to your health.
Well, in that whole food supply and food source, it was the farm workers that brought the consciousness to natural, organic, pesticide, herbicide, chemical-free food. And now it's a major industry in this country.
Right. And right here on this place where we're having this celebration is where Caesar did his last 36-day water-only fast to bring to the attention of the country about the poison in our foods.
And here we are still dealing with, pesticides and chemicals. But today is significant. It marks the beginning of the rise of the farm workers. And in that whole last 50 years, Dolores, we've seen a change. There used to be a time where Chicanos were the major workers in the files. We were out there in the fields, all of us from Texas, all the way to California. There was migration between, the Southwest. But now it's changed. Now the majority of workers are undocumented, or from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala. And the farm workers, the union itself, has shifted, it's changed. There was a time where, there was a hesitant by the union to organize the undocumented.
Oh, that's not true. The union union has always been, United Farm Workers has always been the largest organization of undocumented workers ever, you know? When we passed the amnesty bill in 1986 with the help of Senator Ted Kennedy, Howard Berman from California, Peter Rodriguez from New Jersey, and when we set up all of the offices to be able to get people to make their applications, to our surprise, we found out that more than half of the members of the United Farm Workers were undocumented. But the only thing that the United Farm Workers was against is people breaking our strikes. And that would apply to citizens, residents, or undocumented. That was always the issue. Not that we were ever against undocumented. We always had many, many undocumented. And to this day, we are probably the largest organization of undocumented workers still today.
Well,
and when I say we, I mean the United Farm Workers, okay? Because as you know, I'm not with the union anymore, but the union itself.
But you yourself have continued the work of organizing and training people through your Dolores Huerta Foundation.
Absolutely. And one other thing, too, all of the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, all of the workers receive all of the benefits of the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, whether they're documented or undocumented. In the United Farm Workers, all of the medical plans, all the pension plans apply to workers whether they were documented or undocumented. People don't know that.
That's good to know. Last closing words for us, Dolores?
Pardon me?
Any last words for us, for the audience?
Well, we know that we are celebrating 50 years of victories of the Farm Workers Union, but we know we have 50 years ahead of us to continue the struggle so that we can get equitable education for our people, so we can have everybody can have a fair wage and a living wage for everyone, and of course to get immigration reform.
Thank you so much, Dolores. It's always a pleasure and a privilege, honor for us to hear your words.
When I get in a strike, I don't know anything of English, but now I try very hard. Yeah. Show me the suffering of the most miserable, so I will know my people's plight. We need to break for others, for you are present in every person. Help me take responsibility for my own life, so that I can be free at last.
Miguel Gavilan Molina, reporting for Pacifica Network. I'm here in Delano, California for the 50th anniversary of the great strike that started the rise of the United Farm Workers. I'm here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be talking to Bobby Kennedy from the Kennedy family, who were supporters from the very beginning of the United Farm Workers struggle. Welcome to Pacifica Network, Bobby, and it's, like I said, it's a pleasure having you here. Your family has a legacy supporting the United Farm Workers efforts. Your father was here when Cesar broke one of his longest fasts, and basically the incredible immortalized picture forever where your father's handing a piece of bread to Cesar as he was literally, I believe, on his 36th day of his fast. You're here today. What words do you have for our audience and the people gathered here?
Well, I'm really happy to be here. This is a celebration of American democracy. It's an important event in American history, but it also is an important event for my family. And my father had a very close relationship with Cesar, probably closer than any of his other political allies. He came out of here first very reluctantly. But then when he saw in Kern County the way that the sheriffs had joined forces with the growers and were attacking the people that they were supposed to protect, it made him angry. He already had an instinct for the underdog, and then he went and joined the picket lines with Cesar, and their friendship grew after that. And it was a very, very, both of them, I think under any circumstances would have loved each other. They were both similar in many ways. They were devout Catholics. They had lots of children. They were both kind of short in stature. They were reserved, but they weren't kind of political retail politicians, backslappers and small talkers, but they had an intensity that drew people to them, and they had an integrity. and a courage that put principles, that allowed them to make broad sacrifices for large principles. Cesar was so close to my father that in 1968, when my father came out here a second time in March, Cesar was the first person that my father told that he was going to run for president. He told Cesar that before he told us, his family, before he told any of his aides. He told Cesar Chavez, and Cesar helped him. It was his aides did not want him to come because they didn't want him to be seen with rabble-rousers and people that many people felt were communists. And yet my father said to his aides, "But I like Cesar," and that was his explanation about why he was coming out here.
Well, it was one of the turning points. It was your father coming out here to the fields of this area here in the valley in Delano that put farm workers for the first time on the national plane, on the national platform, and really ignited, sparked the movement to unionize and bring farm workers who had been completely kept out of the labor agreements that were made in the 1930s into the mix, and it made it a national program, and it's something that continues today. We'd like to thank you for being here in support of farm workers, for coming all the way into the valley here yourself, maintaining that tradition. Any last words for the people gathered here today and our listeners?
Well, I think people need to understand the history, like you said, that the reason what Cesar was up against really began in the 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt tried to democratize our country by throwing out the oligarchs and creating a middle class. And by ending the 40-hour work week, by enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, by banning political contributions by corporations to federal politicians, by having direct election of senators, including women, and ending child labor, and allowing unions to organize. But when he was doing that, he had to get his legislation, progressive legislation, through the Southern senators. And the Southern senators would only do that under one condition: that blacks be excluded from all those protections. And the way they did that was they said, okay, where are the two places where blacks work? We're going to exclude those so they can't be unionized. One was domestic help, and the other was farm workers. The reason they wanted to do that is because they wanted growers to be able to treat their farmers as slaves. They were the old Confederates, they were the slave state Confederates, and they wanted to continue the institution of slavery. And that's what Cesar Chavez came out here to break. And that's what he had to deal with. He had to deal with growers that felt that they had a God-given right to treat their workers with no rights at all, as if they were slave labor. And other Americans didn't understand that. And, I think my father was shocked to learn what was going on, and it made him angry. And he joined arms with Cesar.
Well, listen, Bobby Kennedy, thank you so much for being with us, and si se puede.
Si se puede.
Perspective, because often when you see the movie and things like that about Cesar, people think, oh, Cesar wandered to the field and all the workers came on strike. No, it didn't happen that way at all. We started organizing here in Delano in 1962, okay? With a few people, farm workers, a few at a time. You saw Maria Magana Saludado a minute ago. She had the first house meeting at her house, right there. The first house meeting in Delano was in her house. And this is the way that the workers were organized, poquito a poquito, juntos, a few at a time, to convince them that they had power, right? That they had power, that they could organize, that they could change things, that they didn't have to depend on anybody to do it for them, that they could do it for themselves. And this is a message I hope that we all take away from the Farm Workers Union, that we have to continue the legacy, to continue to organize, to continue to be involved, to continue to be active. And another bit of history. before we had that big major Delano strike. But there were a couple of other little strikes before that. There was a strike in the Woodville labor camp. Anybody remember the Woodville labor camp strike? And we actually have a woman here of that strike, and I want to introduce her, Connie Perez. Would you stand up, Connie? You know, here's here, I can see you. Connie Perez, and she is now a successful accountant, and she helps the kids in that labor camp so that they can go to schools like Harvard, and here's one of them right here. He has just graduated from Harvard. Stand up, okay? Stand up. People can see you. And this is what it's all about. It's about empowerment and making sure that our kids get a quality education. This is what the program is doing as well. Thank you, Connie Perez. Don't forget that name, everybody. Connie Perez, all right? So, you know, when we think about the movement and the impact that it had, and not only here, and sometimes when the farm workers, some of the workers that are here, some of the people who really sacrificed and lost their homes, they lost their homes, they lost everything to make sure that we would be able to win. And then, of course, we had all these wonderful young volunteers, and all the boycott volunteers. Stand up for a big moment, go! All the boycott volunteers. And remember, they were working for $5 a week, all right? $5 a week. And then they had to get all of their food donations and from people who brought us clothes and donations, and that's the way that people lived for the 5 years until we were able to win through that wonderful Grape Boycott. And so when we think of the impact of the Delano grape strike, not only, of course, when people went out there, all the farm workers that went to all of the cities to do the work that they did, and some of you that were here today, and I hope you really get a chance to talk to them. I always like to mention one person in particular, Marcos Munoz. Okay, Marcos in the house. Marcos, who thought he was going to Boston, because he had a girlfriend in Barstow, and he ended up in Boston. But he was the first one to clean that city on the table with. What courage these people have, you know? Like other guys come out with their guys, Marcos cannot read or write in Spanish or English, but he got everybody from Harvard and Yale and Brandeis and Boston University to man his picket lines, okay? That's what an organizer does. So, you know, we have to continue this because we know that the gains that we won for the farm workers here in California, other workers throughout the country do not have them, except for the toilets, okay? We did get the toilets in the fields and the cold drinking water, and but all the other things, the right to organize, unemployment insurance, which, by the way, Reagan vetoed 3 times in a row, you know? So we have to remember that our work is not finished. We have to continue to work and continue organizing. And one more thing, gotta make sure we get involved in voting. This is the legacy also of the union. We got people registered, and we're getting get out to vote, so we get good people to represent them, okay? So, I want to just say a couple of vivas. ¡Que viva la Unión de Campesinos! All right. ¿Se puede o no se puede? Everybody. Again, one more time. Sí, se puede. Sí, se puede. Sí, se
This is Miguel Gavilan Molina reporting for the Pacifica Network, KPFA Flashpoints, and Laonda bajita. I'm here at 40 Acres Compound of the United Farm Workers at the 50th anniversary of the great strike that gave rise to the United Farm Workers and put the Black Eagle across the nation and around the world. It's a great privilege and honor to be here with Danny Valdez, one of the original members of Teatro Campesino. And Teatro Campesino was here from the very start. Along with your brother Luis, we brought Teatro into cities, into towns across the nation, and we presented not just the farm worker, but the Chicano reality. Thank you, Danny, for being here with us today. You just performed some of the canciones. Last night on the air, we were actually playing Brown-Eyed Children of the Sun, which is something historical for us. Welcome today to the show.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Pues Danny, outside of making this a landmark here, the 50th anniversary, you've continued working With the Triato, you've also done independent work. Again, bringing the Chicano, kind of Mexicano, Mexican-American view of music and cultura. You've been a force behind the cultural advancement of La Raza here within the United States. What inspired you?
My mother. It was my mother, you know. We come from a family of 10, so we all fought for attention. That's why we all became performers, you know. But my mother really taught us to stand up for ourselves and to believe in what we were doing. And she taught us that we could do anything we wanted to do, and most importantly, to create change.
Well, here we are, you know, still fighting for that change. 50 years ago, the United Farm Workers were able to organize after they got together with the Filipino brothers to bring, you know, union efforts to organize farm workers. But we're still battling. There's still legislation right now up in the capital, you know, dealing with pesticides, herbicides, and chemicals in the files, you know, trying to force the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to change the regulations and rules. Because every time they eliminate something, they create something new. And it's an ongoing battle. Until recently last year, Danny, the governor finally signed, the Farm Worker Safety Bill, saying you got to have a tarpa, you got to have a shade, you got to provide water, breaks, and bathroom, you know, facilities for workers. One of the only groups in this country that had no protections next to domestic workers. But here you are, still a cultural ambassador. What is your words here today on this gathering? And again, you were there in the beginning. You were kind of a chavalón, like the rest of us.
17.
17. I was actually 12.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was actually here in 66 in the first pilgrimage with my Nino and my tios. But here we are today, still struggling. What is the message that you bring to the peoples today, not only to La Raza, but to the country?
Well, change is created by generations. No one makes change in one generation. You pass it on to the next generation. The struggle here still continues. The struggle for the farm workers' rights, his dignity, it still continues to this day. After 50 years of struggling, we're still struggling. And so that's the most important thing about this struggle here, is it never stops. Farm workers are still having to deal with conditions in the fields that really are inhuman. I mean, thank God they outlawed child labor laws, you know, because the chavalitos, we were in there from 5 years old, you know, and a lot of us didn't go to school for that reason. But I mean, I think those changes have to come through generations. That's one thing Cesar taught us. Change doesn't happen necessarily in your generation. You have to pass it on to the next generation and the next generation after that, because that's the only way to create change.
And in the indígena point of view, the Chicano Mixteca, it's 7 generations. And here we are, you and I, that 7th generation. You've been doing a lot of work and traveling. Last time I saw you was up at the Jose Montoya, tribute, the despedida, and was able to talk to Richard Montoya, and he mentioned to me that you were putting together something new that you were working on. If so, what is that? What is your project that you're currently working with?
Well, currently right now I'm working on a concert that will happen. It's a tribute to the Mestizo album, which just went through its 40th year. So we're planning a big show in Los Angeles for the Mestizo show. I'm also doing some stuff working with a playwright named Jose Cruz Gonzalez that we're working on a one-man show as well. There are several projects in the works. There's a book in the works. So we're busy. We're constantly busy. I'm teaching at Regis University in Denver. I'll be there through the month of October. So it's been a very busy year.
Well, Danny, when you come through the Bay Area, as before, we were able to catch up with you on a couple of occasions when you did the work with Linda Ronstadt, Canciones de mi Padre, and also when you and your brother came out with Zoot. We were fortunate to have you in the cabina, in the studios. When you come through the Bay Area with your music, your concierto, or the book, please, la puerta está abierta, and el micrófono is there to give you that platform.
Gracias, hermano. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Danny. And one last thing, if you could say a cubo to all listeners of La Onda Bajita, Radio del Barrio Aztlán.
Yeah, La Onda Bajita is the thing. It's the bomb. You should be listening to it because it's going to teach you something. Adios.
Your name?
Daniel Valdez.
Gracias, Danny. Muchas gracias. Welcome to the shows today, Arturo. Tell us, with all these people, there's veteranos here, there's original strikers here, there's a lot of young folks. What is the message on this day that you want to give the country?
That these women and these men that had the courage and the will and the determination to go out on strike in 1965 changed the face of agriculture. They demonstrated that poor people, that hardworking people, if they made an effort, that they could bring about major changes. And they took on the giant agricultural industry here in California. And they decided that it was time for them to receive the respect and dignity they deserve as human beings. And they expected a decent wage and benefits for the work that they're doing. And so this is what this day signifies.
But here we are, Arturo, 50 years later, and I know that the United Farm Workers is still dealing with, the issues of pesticides, the issues of chemicals in our food source. I know until recently you were able to pass through legislation that gave farm workers safety and protections. This is 50 years after the initial, strike that gave rise to the farm workers. What can we see with that happening now and, of course, in the next 50 years for farm workers?
We just made major changes here in the state of California around the issue of heat. And we got new regulations that provide the best protections for farm workers anywhere in the United States. When the temperatures rise to be 80 degrees plus, there has to be shade provided to the workers. Now when it gets to 95 degrees, the workers are giving a 10-minute paid break by the company to every 2 hours in order to be able to relax, in order to be able to ensure that they don't get impacted by the heat. And so that's a critical importance. And then we're going to be announcing something this next week on the issue of pesticides. So we're really hopeful that on Monday we'll be able to alert the world for even more changes to benefit farm workers, to protect our environment, and to ensure that consumers have safe food.
Well, that is big steps forward. Some people say in some ways that, the efforts are still, trying to push for, like you said, justice and dignity. But here we are at a turning point. And one of the things that I look back on is that the United Farm Workers efforts, 50 years ago, with Dolores and Cesar, who were Chicanos, coming to the aid of our Filipino brothers and sisters, gave rise to the not only the unionizing of farm workers, which government officials in the country never thought was possible. You've proven that wrong. But, in that age, it also gave rise to the Chicano consciousness. You yourself as Chicanos, we as Chicanos are still carrying that banner. What is the message you want to send to young people today?
To, first of all, just believe in themselves and believe that they can make changes. It's not anything that's out of this world. It's not anything that we haven't experienced. We have demonstrated as a result of what workers did, men and women, children, did back in the 60s, that it can be done today, and it's happening today. We just saw workers from companies that have just won strikes in their particular areas of work, whether it be in the tomatoes at Gargiulo or Tripoli or San Joaquin Tomato, at those companies, where they're now establishing the best wages for tomato workers in the United States today. And they're doing it as farm workers, they're doing it as women and men that are going to fight for their rights. Young folks today should know and understand that they can do it. Si se puede.
And talking about si se puede, even the president, Barack Obama, used that in his campaign. Yes, we can. Si se puede. And thank you for bringing that into light. I know recently you traveled back east on Labor Day to attend a gathering in Boston, I believe, Massachusetts, with the president. And for us as Chicanos, as former, campesinos, farm workers, myself, Chuch, and others, it was like a tremendous pride. Here we are 50 years later, finally being recognized by the White House, and you being invited as the foremost leader and voice for the farm workers was a great privilege and honor for us to share with you.
It definitely was, and I mean, whoever gets to fly on Air Force One, who would have ever thought, when we all got started, in this, nobody would talk to us. It was Bobby Kennedy, who was the first major politician here in the United States today that had the understanding and knew the importance of farm workers, that came to stand with us and be with us in 1966, and then he never left our side until he died in 1968.
And today, Arturo, his son, Robert Kennedy Jr. was here. It was unbelievable.
His son, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who I've worked with throughout the years, has always come and been parted with us. The Kennedy family's always been with us. Whenever we've asked him to come to join with us in celebration or in sorrow, when we have funerals or deaths of farm workers, when Caesar would break his fast, they were always there with us. In the big marches and the big events like today, They've always been a part of it. So we're so grateful to the Kennedy family, and also Ethel Kennedy. Robert Kennedy's widow wrote a beautiful letter that we've distributed to everybody that attended here today. So we're extremely grateful. It's a great day.
What's any last words for your audience out there listening and eager to hear what is happening today?
You know, we just want to thank everybody for all the support that they've given farm workers throughout the years. You know, it's farm workers, they feed everyone in the nation, but at the same time, we want to do that, and we're happy to do that. And at the same time, though, we just want to be respected and treated with dignity like any other human being. Thank all of you very much, and si se puede.
Si se puede. Thank you so much, Arturo.
Buenos. What's up, everyone? My name is Mr. Chuch. I know all of you know me. We're here in Delano celebrating and honoring those that, fought real hard in the fields. We're here at the United Farm Workers Delano, and I'm here to support them and believe in all the things we do to help the United Farm Workers to gain support on things that are happening to our gente right now. Right now, there's many of our brothers and sisters dying in the fields of misery, because I call it the fields of misery because, I escaped it, and I know how it is out there. So we need to continue supporting them and honoring them and make sure that our government system know that it is time to support and give our workers more money for what they do, because it's hot out here. We're here, it's hot, and we're not picking. So we're lucky, that we're just here, honoring them. But, it's hot out here. We have to support them. They're the ones that bring food to our table. It's time to take back and fight back.